All right, so we are recording.
All right.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Jake. How are you? It's great to be here. I love your channel, so I'm
Good.
really glad to be here to support it.
It's really nice having you on. So for those of you who don't know, Mark goes by Enlightened Bulbasaur. That's his, and he does have a YouTube channel. And do you have an Instagram page with the same name?
I do have an Instagram page. Everything with the same Enlightened Bulbasaur. If you're curious, in seeing my YouTube channel full of all this great 240p content from 2009, which is literally just me with a MacBook webcam reversing the computer and like holding my cards in front of it. If you're interested in that sort of content, then my channel is for you.
Well, Mark and I guess, really met through E4 and started talking on E4. And I know that you watched some of my videos, and we talked a little bit about it on E4. And Mark and I think, share a lot of similar views about Pokemon. Mark is someone with a ton of experience in this hobby, an amazing collection, and hopefully he's going to show us some of his really cool cards today. And it's frankly just like a really wealth of knowledge, when it comes to Pokemon. And and part of why I wanted to have him on for this collector discussion is because he is he's really a collector. He's not a business. He does all of this because he has a passion for it and has been collecting
100%.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's why you're, I think, such a perfect guest for this segment.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, Jake.
So I guess the first thing, just because my audience may not know you, is can you just tell me a little bit about when you got into the hobby, your experience with the hobby, those sorts of things?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the basics of my collection story, I think it's going to sound like a broken record. I was a kid. I got into Pokemon in 1999 when the cards base set first came out. I remember, I immediately fell in love with Pokemon. Like, my first experience of it was I saw my friend. He had some cards. I had no idea what they were, but he had the holographic Raichu. And I just thought that was so dope and that I had to have it. And the next thing you know, I was like full on Pokemon maniac craze in 1999. Like, I was obsessed. Like, for those of you who were around back then, like, I was even the kid on Pojo.com, like, writing reviews of recaps of Pokemon episodes, like, and submitting them like as soon as they ended. And like, I would actually write I talked about some strategies for Pokemon cards. At the age of, I guess that would have been like 11 years old. So if you want to see an 11-year-old writing about optimized Pokemon card strategy, you might be able to find something there. Look for someone named Marc. That's all I'll say.
That sounds pretty adorable, honestly.
Yeah. So I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed. And, my parents were generous enough to get me a couple of packs a week. And I built a collection that way. I think it was, so basically from early 1999 until about mid-2000, I was full on. Up through about Team Rocket. And I also remember having some like Japanese Neo Genesis. I think that was, so like really like the end points I reached at childhood were like English Team Rocket and Japanese Neo Genesis. And then I stopped, it was just like, it was a sudden thing. I just stopped collecting. I became much more of a sports fan, and that took more of my focus, I remember, and, just life in general. And Pokemon kind of fell by the wayside for me. Fast forward about 9 years, and I was, I guess I would have been a college kid, like 20, 21 years old. And I remember it was probably one day when I was feeling nostalgic, homesick. I went to college in Montreal. I live in New York. I'm from New York and went to college in Montreal. I think I was probably just feeling kind of homesick one day and reflecting on things. And sorry about the noise in the background. I'm on the balcony. But anyway, so I was reflecting.
All right. I think we can still hear you pretty well.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't know. One day I just started thinking about like childhood memories. And I just randomly, the way I rediscovered this hobby was I went onto eBay because I was curious to see what old Pokemon cards are being sold. Like, I was curious to see like what was on there. I hadn't really followed like the new cards in years. I was just completely okay. Well, what is going on with Pokemon now? And looking it up cards on eBay, frankly, I probably like was looking at what are the most expensive cards, because who isn't curious about that? Everyone wants to know what the most expensive thing is. And I just discovered, oh yeah, those are the cards I knew. These first edition base set cards. I didn't have any first edition cards, but I love base set. And all of a sudden, like I learned about graded cards, PSA cards, and I started researching more about these cards, and I just became completely. I just really want to jump back in. I just love the idea of sort of reclaiming my childhood by like getting something truly special. You know, I had like normal unlimited base set cards, maybe a few shadowless cards. I never had first edition cards as a kid, but I knew what they were. I had known about them as a kid. So I'm like, yeah, I want to get those first edition cards. I want to get them in this PSA graded. So I just kind of immediately jumped back into the hobby that way. And I've been in the hobby more or less ever since 2009.
Yeah, you and I sound so similar. I mean, I came back a lot later than you in 2017, but I had the exact same feelings that you describe, and that wanting that first edition that I never had as a kid, and learning about the PSA grading and the excitement of the chase around those high grades. And, you know, hopefully we'll get into it a little bit here, and then trophy cards, which we both really like, learning about that sort of rarity and scarcity that we didn't know existed, or I didn't know existed.
Oh, I didn't know either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are your current sort of collection goals right now? And what have sort of been your collection goals? Why don't you share just over like the last year or two? What have you sort of been working on?
Sure. So I would say a long-term goal that I had, and was something that has mostly been finished for a long time. Like for a long time, I just said I'm going to collect first edition base set Jungle and Fossil PSA 10 first edition, because the reason I immediately jumped to that, like as like a first thing, was because those are the sets I knew as a kid, right? That's what I really knew. And it's also, I can think of them as being the rookie cards of Pokemon for the first generation, which is really what I grew up with. So to me, I immediately gravitated towards PSA 10 first edition base Jungle Fossil. And I pretty much finished that goal mostly. Oddly enough, there were like a few like Jungle commons I hadn't bothered getting, because it was like, yeah, it's stupid. I'm not going to pay $100 for like a card that's like so easy to get, right? But yeah, I've had like the big cards for years. So yeah, that was kind of like what I was doing for a while, and it actually took me a while to realize how much I loved other cards that I did not have as a kid. Like for a while, it was like it was like about reclaiming my childhood. Mm-hmm. And I think over the years, I started to realize, you know, as much as I love base Jungle Fossil and that's its own thing, at the same time, it's like everyone knows base Jungle Fossil. If I were to just have a collection show you base Jungle Fossil, as much as you may love my PSA 10 first edition cards, you also may think that it's a little lacking. It lacks a little character. You know, it's a little generic, right? Mm-hmm. So I think when you start to think about building your collection more, you want to diversify and make things more interesting and collect maybe random things. And I think that makes things more interesting. So I guess in the last couple of years, I've purchased I've actually spent some time starting to build up binder sets, you know, because as much as I love like the high grade premium cards, I still think that you can't really fully replace the amazing feeling of just flipping through a binder with your PSA cards, you know? So like, to me, that's not something I would like, you know, I love like these PSA 10 cards that I'm going to show you soon. But at the same time, I also have just such a love for flipping through a binder. It really captures that feeling of being a kid. And like, I was the sort of kid who would like always want to rearrange the cards in my binder page and like try to optimize them and just have fun with that. And there's some purity to just flipping through a binder. So to me, I can appreciate both aspects of having these high grade cards. And I think there's value in that. And I also think there's value in having these binder collections.
Yeah. Yeah, I resonate with all of that myself. I have so much fun building out new binders and coming up with like new binder ideas and new orders of the cards, just kind of moving the same cards around in different orders. Right now, I'm actually working on a Yu-Gi-Oh! Bandai.
Oh, nice.
So I recently found those cards. I love the art. So I'm working on like a binder of that. I'm looking at some like old Dragon Ball Z cards that are kind of cool. Some of the old Prism cards. I'm doing like a binder of that, and that for me gets that really that collector excitement. And it's also great because those cards are still fairly affordable right now.
Yeah.
Unlike creating a binder of like mint first edition base cards would be right
You're,
now.
you're saying PSA 10 first edition base isn't affordable? What?
Sorry, I'm just like a poor peon who can't afford to just drop hundreds of thousands of dollars in an instant on cards.
Oh man.
I think your point too, I also agree with and resonate with is your point about sort of loving the nostalgia and really going after initially those cards that you grew up with as a child and getting sort of like the best version of that card, sort of a first edition mint card and the excitement of that. But for me, like, and sort of what you were alluding to, there was also a lot of excitement in seeing like the gold stars, which I never knew about for the first time, different trophy cards. And for me, I love the vintage Japanese. That's my favorite. And even like the top zone, I really like the original top zone, but the Cardos, like those cards and the art on those, really, I as soon as I saw those, I knew I was going to collect a bunch of those, that sort of thing.
I actually have some of those that I was planning on showing you today because I love those cards so much.
Yeah, I'm working on collecting full PSA 10 sets of all of those, and I made quite a bit of progress. I probably have some, one of the most complete collections of those. Just because the pops are so low on them, and they were still very affordable. Although now
it's starting to change now.
Oh
it's
my
starting
gosh.
to change.
I don't know if you saw the Pikachu, the top zone blueback Pikachu in PWC.
Did it go for like $2,000 or $4,000 or something like that?
I think it was like 2,500 somewhere.
Okay, 2,500. Yeah,
and that card was like $80, $100 not too long ago.
I know, it's insane. I could single out a particular person for why that may be changing. I think he's a very influential person. His name is Jeremy Powder. I think he's really helped push those cards. For those of you who don't know, he's someone who a few months ago, he bought like this PSA 10 first edition base set, and he's been on Instagram and even on the E4 forum, and he's made a big push actually for those like vintage cards. And I happen to know that he has some connections and that he's influenced some people. And I kind of see a trickle effect there. It's very interesting to see. But regardless of like why this is happening, there's no doubt about it. Like all of a sudden, like after years of like them just being like extremely, extremely niche, like all of a sudden these cards are exploding and people are really starting to appreciate them more. It makes me happy for what I already managed to collect.
Yeah. And it gets into this idea that maybe we can talk about a little bit there about influencers, about what cards do we think should be the most valuable or should be valuable. These are conversations we've had, and how do you, as sort of a collector, and slash maybe investor to some degree, or that you hope you are getting cards at a good value where they won't tank, you're not really overpaying, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I come from the perspective of, my goal was never to take money out of this hobby. My goal was to make money in the hobby to then put back in the hobby, or make the money that I budgeted for Pokemon go as far as possible within Pokemon to create the largest collection. So all of my finance, my investing finance thinking is based on that sort of principle mostly. But, down the line, long term, it would be nice to be able to sell some of these in case of emergency, or for, to help with my family or whatever, what have you. And so I see you nodding along to a lot of that. And so
I'm so resonating with this. Definitely.
I feel like we have very similar views on this stuff. So
I just jump in with you on that to add to that. No, I just have such a similar view on that. Like when I entered this hobby, the high end of this hobby back in 2009, for whatever the high end in 2009 looked like, when I purchased cards, I did care about like the value of the cards to some extent, But really what it was about was justifying my purchases. Like if I was going to spend hundreds of dollars for these cards, it was like, I really just want to be able to justify the fact that I'm spending hundreds of dollars on a Pokemon card. It wasn't that, oh, this would be an amazing investment. One day I'll be rich because I'm getting these cards. I never had that thought. I was honestly just hoping, if nothing else, that the cards retain their value, and I would have been happy with that. I didn't feel justified in buying the cards if they could just even do that. And it was just over the years. I mean, it's crazy how what's happened, of course. And now I'm at the point where I'm like you, where now I have to say, well, I do want to cash out some of it, because it would just be crazy if I didn't. I don't know what my fiance would say if I just said, sorry, honey, but these Pokemon cards are going with me. All of them are going with me to the grave. So, I definitely want to take some with me forever, but like all of them, I don't know about what she'd say about that one. So.
Yeah, my girlfriend tells me things like she views it as like she just pretends that they're worth nothing, because if she thought and is basically just trying to respect and think about it like these are just Jake's fun and enjoyment and not something we're ever going to like rely on for future. I think that's how she copes with the insane value, of this stuff. And so I guess, I think one interesting topic, and you can start to show cards too if you happen to have some.
Oh,
but
yeah.
what do you feel are should be the most valuable? What do you feel should be the most valuable sought after cards in the hobby? And do you feel like sort of where the influencers line up? Do you feel like there's always, do you always agree with the influencers, or are there places that you disagree? And what has your sort of experience been like over the years with that?
Okay, so before I answer the question of the specific cards that I think are maybe like the most undervalued or should be the highest value, I will just answer the second part of your question first, which is that I absolutely think that when we're talking about the highest of high-end cards in the hobby, that influencers do play a major role in how the market views these cards. I think even for people who do have money to spend, I think there is a knowledge gap that a lot of people have. I think, when we're talking about certainly something like trophy cards, people may be familiar with the term, they may be familiar with some of the items, like maybe, your illustrators and your trophy Pikachus, and maybe your super secret battle cards. They might have some familiarity with that, but I would say for the most part that like there's a lot of gaps in information, and people don't really know what the distribution of these cards are. They don't really know what to look for when considering whether to buy these cards, and they really just they gravitate towards cards that they've already seen people pushing. So if some influential people are showing off a couple of particular cards on their YouTube channel or their Instagram or anything else, then people will say, oh, well, I mean, that's the card I saw, so that's the card I'm going for. And there are a lot of people out there. I've talked to a lot of these people. I know there are people who would spend a lot of money who really don't have that much knowledge about what they're spending the money on. So there are big gaps. There are big gaps in knowledge here. And your question is actually one of the reasons why a few months back I decided to say, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of how difficult it is to get information about these trophy cards. I'm sick of like going through Bulbapedia, which is often like very incomplete. I kind of just want like all this information organized in one place, so I can actually like, it helps give me an overall picture of what's what. And so because of that, I should give credit to a couple of people from their elite E4 usernames are Chalk and Minor Key. Mm-hmm. And they started putting together a list of cards, trophy cards, and like the distribution of these trophy cards. And I kind of like used that as inspiration to create this like giant spreadsheet, if you will, of like all of the rarest cards in the hobby. And like the standard was that I'm going to find every card in the hobby that has a distribution of under 1,000. That was the arbitrary number that was used. I'm going to organize all those cards into one list. We're going to get the exact, as much best we can, get all the distribution, any additional information that might be relevant to the cards, and just kind of create one list. So, you know, I did that. It's just a Google spreadsheet. It's nothing too crazy, but it really helped me put, I think, a lot of trophy cards in perspective. And I would say having that sheet actually gave me some additional confidence in making a couple of the large purchases that I did. You know, because I felt more comfortable with the knowledge that I had about what's out there. And I'm someone who, I don't want to put a lot of money into something unless I feel really confident in the knowledge that I have in it. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question about influencers and like knowledge, but do you want me to get into specific parts?
Yeah, I mean, why don't we jump right into, there's so many topics that I think we can cover in this too, in terms of like extra copies of these sorts of things, what's going on.
Oh yeah.
You know, how do we determine, and, you know, I hope that you'll come on our channel again in the future and we can have more in-depth discussions if, you know, if people enjoy this, talking about like specific trophy cards. But because I think it's I actually think that they are undervalued in a lot of cases, because people are anxious and nervous because they don't understand the actual rarity, and they don't have there is a knowledge issue. And so there are certain cards that I think are very undervalued versus other trophy cards. And there are certain trophy cards that are quite a bit overvalued compared to other trophy cards, not necessarily compared to the rest of the market, which I think is another discussion, set cards. But I think the more information people, like genuine, honest, objective information goes out there, then people will be able to see that and make those decisions for themselves, versus just having an influencer say, these are the 3 best trophies, and not give you the specific release, you know, population reports. Because the reason, in my mind, a trophy card should be very valuable is because, you know, 3 main things. One is just the coolness of the art and of the card, right? And the second is like the coolness of the release, the history, the story of the card. And then the third thing is the amount, the pop report, the amount that were released into the world, or we think are released, and the danger of extra copies and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I would add one more, to me, what is a very important component, which is whether or not the card is truly unique and that it has truly unique art. I think that is also a critical component of whether or not a trophy card deserves to be on that pedestal.
Yeah, if your only option to get that art is that very exclusive version, versus there are other trophies that maybe were printed in Japanese with that art, but in English you can get a cheaper promo version of the same art.
Exactly.
That sort of thing you're talking about, or a lesser stamped version, or other sorts of options.
Right. Yeah.
So, can you show us the trophy, your recent trophy card, and we can talk about that card? And
definitely. I still get like this magical feeling every time I open this little box I have and I pull this thing out of it. So
that's how I feel with you, just like pulling out the card and I don't even own it.
It's yeah. I mean, this is, you know, for those who don't know, I think anyone who is familiar with trophy cards would know it, but for those who don't know, this is a #1 trophy Pikachu card. This particular card was awarded at, let me explain it this way, okay? So these are the original trophy cards in the hobby, okay? When we talk about trophy cards, all right, literally the origin of the name is because this Pikachu is holding up a big fat trophy. Like, that's really where this is coming from. It's a trophy card because it's a card that was won in a tournament. Okay, so it's actually truly a trophy. It's given out to a winner of a Pokemon card game tournament. And the original trophy Pikachus were given out there were 3 major tournaments in Japan. The first was something called like the Pokemon card game official tournament in 1997. And at that tournament, there were 4 of each of these that were given out. Okay. So then there was a second tournament that took place between 1997 and 1998. And that was called like the Lizardon Mega Battle Tournament. And for those of you who don't know, Lizardon is actually the Japanese term for Charizard. So it's like the Charizard Mega Battle Tournament or whatever. And That was the second tournament, and that's actually where this card comes from. And that tournament, and these were distributed between 1997 and 1998. Okay, people know it colloquially as the 1998 Trophy Pikachu, but this actually might have come from 1997. Then there was a third tournament, which was the Camex Mega Battle or Blastoise Mega Battle tournament. And so the second tournament had 14 of these distributed. The third tournament had 14 of these distributed. So between the three tournaments, you had 32 total of these distributed. For 32 of the number one, the gold trophy, 32 of the silver trophy, 32 of the bronze trophy. So that's the official story and of the tournament. But in terms of just like explaining why this card is so special, maybe I'll just kind of zero in here. In terms of explaining why the card is so special, I mean, first of all, that distribution, it's like unbelievable rarity. I mean, that in itself, you know, it's as much as we love the art and all that stuff and the history, there's also just something cool about owning something that only a few other people in the world really get to own, right? Yes. So that's there's no doubt, that's a big part of the appeal. And, you know, this card, if there were 32 of them ever printed, I mean, not ever printed, we can get into that later, right? We can get into that later. But if there were 32 ever awarded, and, you know, and some of them are still in the hands of the original winners, I'm sure. Like, I know the PSA population for this card is, if you count all three tournaments, right? If we're combining all three tournaments, it would be about 10 or 11, something like that. Anyway, so amazing rarity, amazing history of it, you know, coming from the era 1997, 1998, like that original golden era of Pokemon, like before it even went overseas, right? We're talking about back when it was just a Japanese phenomenon. And it was like really that it captures the feeling of sort of the genesis of Pokemon, especially with this sort of fat Arita Pikachu. This is also an Arita illustration. And you know, the idea of, to me, one of the things that makes it so special is the idea that it's like the number one, it's the top prize in a franchise like Pokemon that says, be the very best, right? So it sort of captures like, to me, in a way, everything Pokemon is about. Like, it's everything that you would want in a trophy card. It just, yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it. It's just an amazing card. And to me, it was always the card that was my personal grail. You know, because we can get into some people, often when people think about the top card in the hobby, you know, they know the illustrator. And I can get into, if you want, a comparison between this card and the illustrator and my thoughts on that.
You know, I think before you jump into that, I think that, you know, the three cards that I think come to mind are your PSA 10 first edition Charizard base set, right? That card, the illustrator, and I think the lesser cards are these Pikachu trophies. But I think that the illustrator and the Charizard, I think, tend to come to most people's mind depending on how into the hobby they are. And so there are going to be people watching this, I'm sure, at some point, or, you know, immediately, who don't know what the Pikachu illustrator is, don't even know trophies. This will be their first experience with it, and getting in touch with that. So the holy grail of the set cards tends to be that Charizard.
Oh yeah.
So
by far, not even close.
Yeah, and I also think we could get into a comparison of all of these, or of the set cards versus those. But yeah, if you could go into sort of comparing the illustrator to that you know, wonderful Pikachu trophy that you have there, that would be, I think, really great for a lot of people watching. Yeah,
for sure. So when I I talked about before how you know, I created this spreadsheet of trophies, and I think like when you know, one of the things the spreadsheet does is it creates a timeline of when the trophies came out, right? And this was also, by the way, like the first trophy. Besides the first version of this, which is the first tournament. This is the second tournament. But when we're still talking about 32 copies total, to me, it's still like, you know, it's incredible. But anyway, so comparing this to the illustrator. So for those who do know trophies, who are familiar with trophies, or maybe even people who are not familiar with trophies, I think a lot of people think of the illustrator as the top card in the hobby. And if you're going by price, it's unequivocal. There's no doubt that in terms of what the market says is the top trophy card in the hobby, it's the illustrator. You know, we've had people spend $250,000 on this card. So yeah, it takes the cake in terms of money. But where does that come from? Where is this idea that the illustrator is the card to get? It's actually interesting if you follow the history, and it's important to think about how information spreads, and it's important to think about influencers and all that sort of thing. So you could go back almost 20 years in the hobby, and there were articles, well, not that, there were articles that were talking about how the illustrator was a top card because it was the rarest card in the world. There were only 6 illustrators ever released according to these articles. I don't know where this originally came from, but that was the information that was out there. So, and people had, if you think people have no knowledge now, imagine how little people knew back then, right? It was just barren. So somehow this information got out there. Oh, this illustrator, there were only 6 copies of it. And it just became known as the rarest Pokemon card in the world. You know, and by the way, that's a term that people love throwing out there. I've seen certain influential people on YouTube saying, this is the rarest card in the world. I love this card. It is not the rarest card in the world.
I've seen channels with over 1 million subscribers.
Oh yeah, certain channels with over 1 million subscribers saying,
talk about
the rarest card in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God. But
so
much
crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, there was this idea that the illustrator was the rarest card in the world, and that stuck. And for over a dozen years, that notion that there were only 6 copies was never really challenged. So it really wasn't that long ago, the idea that people started to understand, wait, there are definitely more than 6 copies. And then we know that there are 39 copies of the card, which is still amazing, right? 39 copies that were ever awarded of the card. That's incredible, right? And
is that how much they think? Is that how much they think? Is that how many are known right now, or how much they think actually exists?
So we're going to talk about the idea of extra copies. We'll definitely get to that. Okay. The 39 number is based on the information we have about how many of them were actually awarded. So there were 3. So the illustrator was awarded between 3 Kuro illustration contests between 1997 and 1998. There were 3 separate contests. And basically, we have documentation about the cards that actually won. And using these primary sources, we've been able to figure out that there were 39 of them that were officially distributed.
Great.
So the illustrator is an incredible card, and it has amazing, beautiful artwork by Nishida, and amazing rarity, and it's an incredible card. Now, what makes the illustrator more expensive than this card? I don't know. You tell me. You know, maybe it's that idea that people used to consider it the rarest card in the world, and inertia is a very important thing in anything, right? This momentum of being the number 1 card, right? People have this idea that's the number 1 card, and it maintains itself as the number 1 card. But when you look at the characteristics of the card, you know, this was the first trophy card released. To me, like, this back trophy Pikachu that was awarded for winning a tournament, and like, look how happy that Pikachu is. Like, you cannot deny that, right? So the fact that this was the first true trophy card that was given for winning a tournament and being the very best at the Pokemon card game, to me, I think it's more special than the illustrator, which was given out as an illustration contest award. And this was originally, when it was given out, it was given in a trophy case, right? As opposed to the illustrator, which was sent in the mail in an envelope. Not that that's anything wrong with being sent in the mail in an envelope. I mean, the Honus Wagner card that sells for millions of dollars is in a bubblegum pack, right? But it's just something to throw out there. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what makes the illustrator more valuable, but to me, this was my grail. That's when I looked at all the factors behind the cards. To me, this was the top card in the hobby to get, and that's why I went to get it. And the fact that I could get it for a much lesser price than Illustrator, that was very good for me.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling on these things is that that, you know, over time, sort of logic and rationality and people's arguments do matter, and that inertia, although a strong force for certain things, can change, particularly under a lot of pressure. And so we've seen this throughout a bunch of set cards and different sorts of things. Like, if you looked at like what were the most expensive. I'm just going to throw it like fossil. Like, what were the most expensive holos in fossil initially? They changed over time because people realized which ones were harder to grade. They got new information, and that changed their feelings on the cards. And for a long time, people buy based on what an expert or what an influencer tells them is the rarest, is the best. And sometimes that person doesn't give the information, doesn't say this card, there's more copies, this card, there's less copies, or that we don't really know, or it could change over time. It doesn't give that complete information. I think the other piece, right, and the more subjective piece can be, and I like this sort of argument of like, what should be more valuable? Should it be the art type trophies or should it be the game trophies? And I think that's a whole nother discussion. Yeah. And I really like both, and you see the sort of, things from like the snap, the snap contest, the snap cards to like your Art Academy cards now to, the different variations. I think you have a snap, right, Bulbasaur? Yeah.
You said snap, so I had to bring it out.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I guess to sort of maybe begin to sort of end the discussion today, and hopefully we can meet to talk more about this in the future, is where do you see the market right now, and maybe start with like specifically for these high-end trophy cards we've been talking about, and maybe for that Charizard card as well, some of your high-end stuff. And then where do you see the sort of middle series, the Diamond and Pearl, Black, that sort of era, and maybe a little bit of like the Gold Star Nintendo EX, or do you see that as more part of WotC? And then where do you see like the very modern stuff, the X and Y, Sun and Moon? And just to kind of put a bow on our conversation today, and then we can meet more in the future.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll start going back early for the earlier cards you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I'll start with the Charizard. So for those of you who have been following the market, like base set has really exploded in value a lot lately. Now it's interesting because Jake, as you pointed out on your channel many times, base set for a long time was not increasing. It was not showing the same returns as many of the other sets, like the stuff that you went for, like with those, the E-Series cards and the Neo cards, and like stuff that I think was undervalued for a long time. And you did a great job picking up and realizing how undervalued those cards were. And major props to you for doing that. And I think over time, like people realize, wait, these cards really are rarer than other set cards, and these cards are beautiful, and they're still like vintage, and like you saw the opportunity of how undervalued they were. So I just want to say props to you on that. But base set has increased a lot in value lately, and there's a very interesting dynamic going on with it right now. You really see that there's, and I've had experience talking to many of these people. I've actually sold them some stuff too. I've already been able to more than pay for the trophy cards I get, just with some extra base set cards I have lying around. But there's new people in this hobby, right? And I think a big part of it is coming from people who are jumping over from sports cards. And, there's certain influential people, again, these influencers, they have such a major impact in the hobby. People like Gary Vee, who have lead this push to Pokemon as investments, right? To Pokemon cards as investments. So these people have been having success investing in sports cards, and now they're starting to see the value in Pokemon cards. And one of the reasons I think base set has gone up so much in value is because the instincts of these sports cards collectors, what do they always do in sports? They go for the rookie card, right? That's they go for the rookie card, the high grade, popular athlete, popular Pokemon rookie card. So I think like that's what they're going for right now. And also, having had a chance to speak to many of these people, the people who are investing in these cards, most of them I'd say are still around like my age. I'm 32 years old, so I was in that prime demographic for when I got wrapped up in Pokemon. And so most of them do have at least some love from Pokemon, like from childhood. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also important to point that out. I don't think that there are too many people who are jumping into these cards who literally are only viewing it as an investment, Okay, so I do think that's a critical thing to point out.
That's
anyway, this is a lot
for all of us.
Yeah, yeah, that is, because if they were only looking at it as an investment, that would be a very bad thing. But I do think they're seeing it as a combination of like they appreciate the cards and it's an investment. Anyway, so where do I see the future of these cards right now? This is a whole conversation. I know you want to wrap things up, but I'll take a couple minutes. Sorry.
Take a couple minutes. It was an unfair wrap-up question.
Yeah, it was a tough. There was a lot there.
It was a whole video wrap-up question.
I know, right? I could talk forever about that question. But basically, with these cards, like the first edition base set cards, for example, like the reason I actually didn't think that even with like how much they've jumped in value lately, that they probably still are good investments if that's what you're into, is because I see how much new money is entering this hobby, and I see how these cards are not being added to the population report. If you look at like PSA 10 first edition base set holographic cards, for example, there have been 2 of these added to PSA 10 within the last 2 years. There have been none added within the last year and a half, and there are more and more people who want this card every day. And where is the supply coming from? And I could point to things like that. So when you have a situation where more and more people want the card, but the supply just isn't there. And also, by the way, there's a first edition base set box that's on Heritage Auctions right now. At last check with the buyer's premium, it was at $198,000, and the auction wasn't finished. It still had to go to the final stage. So we're talking about a box that's selling for like over $200,000 now.
Yeah.
So where is the supply of this card for all those people who want this card going to come from? I don't know. So honestly, I do think it's a pretty good investment, and that's why I'm not selling it, in addition to the fact that I love the card. But of course. But anyway, so
and
yeah,
I would say that to add to that quickly, that actually E-Series is experiencing a similar thing right now, which is interesting, which is where the 10s are not growing a lot for a number of the cards. It's not as dramatic as base set, except for the really difficult pop cards. And we are seeing like the very difficult to grade, cards have not moved in forever. And it's just interesting. So,
I see that. By the way, I would definitely love to come back on one day because I could talk about reasons for that too. But I want to move on with your question because I do want to wrap it up. So other sets, but be careful. Be careful about the cards that are exploding in value. I'll give a counter argument to this Charizard. I'm talking about something that's happened with Jungle Commons right now. I have sold some of these myself. I've been selling like these Jungle Pikachus for over $400 and these Eevees for $300. Complete ignorance. Okay, I felt bad selling these cards. I'm gonna be honest, right? Like I normally, like when I sell cards, like I feel like it's a good exchange, and like I feel like we both have something to feel good about. But this is like the first time I ever actually like felt bad. Like it was just people who were like, they have some familiarity with Jungle, but they clearly have no familiarity with how common that card is and how over the next year those cards are going to explode in value. And so I think those are
Jungle Eevee is the first Eevee. The Pikachu is in the base set. So it's this added level of like, and we had a little debate in one of my comment sections early on, if you remember, about,
I was going to bring that up
because I was a big proponent of I was buying all of those cards at $12 each and have tons of them, just to be honest, because I really saw that they were easily going to go to $50, $60. $400 is a shot. To me, right? So I'm one of the most bullish people for a long time on those types of things because I knew that was going to happen because they're the rookie cards. I've always had that rookie theory, and I knew when we were going to get cross collectors that people are going to want the first of every Pokemon because every Pokemon is loved, not just the holo Pokemon, not just the Pokemon that have holo cards, and there's always going to be that demand. But people are sending in these cards, particularly in Jungle and Fossil, tons of them, and tons of them are going to get 10s and 9s right now. So the one good thing about it, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting your answer, there's just so much to say.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
The one good thing about it is that the numbers are a lot lower than base set right now. So a lot of these cards have 400, you could have 400 more in the pop and you'd still be looking at a similar amount to like the Charmander, which has a ton in the population already, right? You could have 800 more in the pop actually for some of the cards to equal. So there is a lot of that buffer room, but the reason is because people are sitting on like under their beds, I talk to collectors.
I am.
Right.
I am. I'm sitting. I have a ton.
Just
of
have gem mint common after common first edition from because they were opening those and they were keeping them because base set was the only one that they felt like was ever going to have value and be worth grading. So just be super careful, as we're both saying here, that a lot more of those are going to be graded, and that's really going to bring the price down, particularly from those $400. And I said $50 feels like a solid price ceiling for it, where I think we're going to meet around there for a lot of those cards. It's just my instinct. And then you may see more growth in the long term if those really get gobbled up to the point where they're all graded and sold at those prices. But yeah, it's crazy. And I'm with you, man. Selling those right now. I have people contacting me wanting to buy stuff, and I'm like, you don't want to pay. You don't want to buy.
I felt bad. I felt genuinely bad. Yeah. And I, by the way, I just want to give you major props on that, by the way. Because the one thing I didn't have the foresight to see was, my comment to you. I think it was one of the first videos you made on your channel about the jungle and fossil commons. I'm like, but there's a million of those. Like, if they ever went up in value, then a million of them would be graded. But the thing I missed in that comment, in a way, was markets can be slow to react. And if you have to get your cards professionally graded at a company that has a million card backlog, then there is a gap in time there where you can be the one taking advantage of that. So that was certainly something that I missed.
And I think the gap in difference of amount of them graded. I am not convinced. It'll be really interesting to see how many more of those exist than the base set first edition. I cannot wait for 10 years from now when we actually know a little bit more of how many of these sets are out there. I think that'll be great for us collectors, investors, to be like, okay, we really know there's a lot less base first edition versus jungle first edition and these sorts of things. And
I will tell you, I truly believe that. I truly believe that there's a lot less base set first edition. I mean, you just see it based on how many of these boxes sell. Like a first edition base set box might, at least publicly, I mean, I'm not privy to maybe all the private sales, but publicly they sell only once in a rare while. That's maybe once every few months you see one sold. Jungle, you see a jungle box sell every week, on eBay. So that alone just tells you that there's such a difference in these sets.
Certainly in the amount of sealed product left, but again, there's that buffer. So how much of it is sitting under people's beds and these sorts of things? I definitely agree that taking all those things into consideration, it seems because of all that product that's probably sitting under people's beds, those numbers are actually going to be a lot. They're actually going to outdo the first edition, even when there's 1,000 more graded or 800 or 1,000 more graded right now, that it's going to outdo that in the long run. But it'll be interesting to see by what percentage, because again, if Charmanders are selling for $1,500, the common in this is $50. That is a huge difference, right? So we're talking about margins here. So, it's that doesn't seem right unless the Charmander is way less of that, particularly for a card like Eevee. Charmander is going to be, with Charizard is going to be more popular as a starter, but Eevee is such a, a lot of these Pokemon are so important to the hobby that if you're getting them at $50, how many more base set first edition cards, versus jungle first edition cards are you going to need to have that ratio make sense? Because at the end of the day, when you're looking for value, it's these numbers don't really make sense. Now, that number also doesn't make a lot of sense. And I have talked openly, I bought that collection that's now worth $10,000 plus.
That was an amazing
$1,500, right? Because I saw that movement coming and I felt that. But again, every time I feel the movement coming and then I'm surprised by it moved even more than I expect right now. And,
I know.
And that's when, that's where I bring in these bubble videos that I talk about in some of these worries on the channel. But can you give me just a few thoughts? So, base set, wonderful, great investment. How do you feel about the middle sets, and how do you feel about modern in general?
When you say middle sets, can you be specific?
Why don't we do after the Nintendo EX? So why don't we do
So I will tell you that I feel like personally, I'm comfortable talking with things I have knowledge about. And I think for the WotC era, I have a pretty good sense of what the cards are all about. Yeah. But for that sort of post EX era, that's a gap. That's a gap in knowledge for me, frankly. And I don't want to just toss random thoughts out there that I really don't like. I don't want to give people misinformation.
Sure, I respect that.
I will just say that I really feel like I have information gaps there, and I don't really want to give an unprofessional opinion on the matter.
Absolutely. Do you follow the modern at all?
A little bit. Like a little bit. I do see like prices that booster boxes sell for. It's never been as interesting to me because it's never been my job. Like Pokemon has never been my job. I'm a collector, right? And so like this idea of like buying booster boxes, I don't know. Maybe it's a good investment. Maybe it's not a good investment. I think it's interesting, and I keep an eye on it, and it's interesting to see how the prices of booster boxes change. But I just feel like I don't really have an informed opinion about that market. So I'm sorry that I can't like provide that.
Not at all. No, I completely respect that. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. Your wealth of knowledge, on those trophy cards, on these sorts of things is awesome. I hope you'll come back on the channel in the future. I think it'd be fun to do more of an in-depth dive with you, and I think people will like that on trophy cards and have more of a conversation, because people do ask me like what trophy card I should buy, and we can do more of a in-depth discussion around that. I also think it might be fun to do some like debate style stuff where where you argue for base set first edition and maybe I argue for another one set or a different set, just for people so they can hear the different arguments, in respect.
I would love to do that. Yeah, definitely, man. Anytime you want me back on your channel, I'm here for you.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Any last thing you wanna say today or share?
The only thing I would say, I think, is the thing I mentioned at the very start, which is just that how much I really appreciate your channel. We were talking about this before we started our recorded conversation today. But to me, you were one of the few people I was able to find who really resonated with me in terms of the way you talk about Pokemon cards and the market. I think you're obviously very passionate about these cards, but you're also willing to share like truly your honest thoughts about these cards. And yeah, I think that is not the most common thing. And I will say, yes, there are some other, as you pointed out, there are other good YouTube channels too. Absolutely. But I want you to know that I just really appreciate your channel. And so yeah, I guess a great job with that. I could never do the job that you're doing. So I really appreciate what you're doing here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good, Jake.
All right, man. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.